Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the success of the incredible and remarkable success of the globalist. This is the globalists using their leftist Marxist puppets and sticking them out front to march through the institutions. They control pretty much every institution in the West now, and there are just small pockets of still left in the West that haven't been taken over by these these globalist leftists, and they're roundly denounced in the media and so on that they're all Nazis. You don't agree with us, you're a Nazi, and quite possibly Hitler, that sort of thing. So what is given this success and given their incredible control, and I'll just come back and talk about that in a moment, what can be done to reverse the process? Is it even possible to do it? And if it is still possible, how would that happen? So that's what I'd like to delve into in this essay. Now, looking at people who, the success of this is mind-boggling. Years ago, I sort of saw this. I guess it would have been, I saw it in sort of the early 1990s. At this stage, I'm doing a lot of, a young guy doing a lot of business traveling. And so I'm getting to see what's going on in all over the world effectively, and especially reading editorials in newspapers. This is pre-internet, this time. And I'm starting to see that this ideology taking shape, and I'm starting to see radicals appearing in education departments, whether it be schools or universities, and these sort of things becoming more obvious, and how this is after the fall of the Soviet Union, of course, but how the apparatus of mind control, brain control, infiltration, and so on that really was part of the Soviet system, the communist Marxist system, is somehow being transplanted to the West. And that I had to sort of pinch myself and say, is this really happening, or am I just imagining this? And no, it is happening. But I thought it won't get anywhere. There's no way that the West and the Western governments, courts of law, these sort of things, there's no way they would allow this to happen, and it's going to be opposed. And in my little corner of the world, I could oppose it, but in the wider world, I sort of looked on with increasing horror as this, or concern that as it unfolded. So this was noticeable, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, or certainly to me. Now, I was in a fairly unique position to observe this, and to, also when you're flying around the world first class, you bump into a lot of people. You're chatting in a long flight, and you hear things, people mention things, and multiple conversations across multiple flights, multiple people. You start to piece together a picture of what's going on, or at least I did. So, but let's have a look at how successful they've been. This is the globalist sort of Marxist activists, but in areas where you'd think their chances of success were minimal. Now, we know people who are very well to do, and they live in their gazillion-dollar houses, have gazillion dollars of motor car in the driveway, go away on gazillion-dollar vacations and so on. These people would spend more on annual vacations than 95% of the population would earn in a year. So, well, in fact, more than 98% of the population would earn in a year. So these people are very well. They don't have to worry about money or anything like that. Kids are going to the most expensive private schools in the country, and they're able to live their life day to day without the slightest care about money. But the wife is a huge believer in Nelson Mandela and the right-wing oppression. Right-wing oppression is everywhere. The Nazis are in control everywhere. And you go, what? You could be kidding. The globalist activists are in control everywhere. So while the globalist activists are in control everywhere, they're at the very same time running around saying that the Nazis are actually in control, which is such an absurd proposition that your jaw drops and you think, am I hearing this? The insanity of it. And, it's in the realms of Martians have landed from Mars and they've taken over the world. It's this sort of stupidity, but they've been brainwashed into believing this, or they want to believe it, or they get derived comfort from believing it, or they believe somehow it makes them morally virtuous to pretend to believe it. But these are very wealthy people, and they, or not so much him, but her. She believes that there's a world awash with Nazi oppression, and she has to fight back. And they go to these yoga parties and talk about how evil Trump is, and he's the new Hitler, and so on and so forth. So they've got this twisted view of the world. But this is in a corner where these people are very wealthy. That the same person was complaining that the cleaners that they employ were leaving a few minutes earlier than the prescribed time, and so I'm not going to pay you for that. This sort of thing. Again, a very, very wealthy person who the money was irrelevant to them, but they wanted to hold these people to account, these peasants. So whereas they say that the black and brown people are all oppressed, they've got no problem in doing plenty of that oppressing themselves by quibbling with the cleaners, the illiterate, peasant cleaners, by quibbling over a few dollars that is irrelevant. They would spend that on the luxury toilet paper they buy. So it's a very strange sort of form where this sort of brainwashing globalist leftist Marxist activism has even crept into these the houses of the rich. So there are numerous biographies of Nelson Mandela, gushing biographies of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and so on, and but nothing but negative sentiments about white history and white people. White civilization is bad, always bad. Everything it did was bad. Everything was Hitler, and absurd propositions that have no sense. How were these people radicalized? But radicalized to a stage where all capacity for analysis is gone. They are unable to think independently, and that maybe is sort of the biggest achievement of the globalist sort of Marxist brainwash, to be able to neutralize independent or capacity for independent thought in so many people, and that has to be an achievement or an accomplishment, as negative as it is, accomplishment of the first magnitude. But I want to go further than that and just look at the spread of organizations that the globalist Marxist people control or have infiltrated and subsequently control. Now, the teachers' unions, they've got across the Western world, they've got those just locked up tight. They're just 100% controlled. And there may be some odd outlier teachers that are there that aren't controlled or brainwashed, but they're too frightened to say anything. Willful and deliberate, purposeful, malicious and aggressive inserting of gay, lesbian activists, trans activists into the classroom as school teachers, purposeful and willful placement of these people there. That's widespread all across the Western world. Now, and then into but all the school boards, anything that feeds into school boards, the selection of principals, the everything that goes into the education system, special lesbian activist groups, gay activist groups, trans activist groups that are all funded generously through one means or another, are also sitting in the front row deciding who gets what jobs, any influential position or position that can influence outcomes anywhere. They're aggressively controlled and sought after by these people. So now then there's a crossover between the school and the tertiary university and the NGOs. So and then there's money going to the NGOs. They're then tied into media groups. They're also tied into providing interns for many of the politicians, so that there's this constant conga line of activism going back and forth and across and up and down. So it's a massive edifice when you look at it in its totality of activism and brainwashing and so on. They even go into things like just in a local community art class. This is the level of detail that they'll go to. So there'll be a community painting class, run by say a local council, and that maybe gets 10, 20 people every Tuesday or something turn up to do the painting. They will even infiltrate that. So in every council and every regional government, there is vast committees of activists, again, interacting with NGOs, universities, back and forth, and very back and across and up and down, that are targeting everything, every gathering of people, no matter how small or large or whatever it is. They will find a way of infiltrating it, either with their ideas or with their money or directly with their activists. And they're quite diligent about this, that every gathering of people must be infiltrated by activists. Now, whether they're doing that defensively in a sense that, well, if we don't get in there, then these people will start making up their own minds, and then they won't think as we do. So we can't allow that independent thought. We have to get in there with infiltrators. And some of these infiltrator activists are very good. They're quite impressive. They've been well trained in the arts of activism and the arts of persuasion and brainwashing and so on. And I went along to a thing with some people that we knew. So it was somebody's birthday party, but they gathered together a group that was I think it was like a pottery or something like that. They'd been part of, she'd been part of a pottery class. And so a lot of people at her birthday were the pottery people. And they brought along, and there's a guy there who was a professional, trained, and very good, by the way, activist. And he flitted around to these groups. And I put it on him. I put it directly on him. You're a fucking activist, aren't you? And he didn't attempt to. First, he attempted to sort of laugh it off and walk away. No. And then he kind of fesses up that they're part of an NGO, and his job is to go around and look at infiltrate these groups, pretend to be doing painting or pottery or whatever, and just infiltrate them and look at their potential for brainwashing and control and so on. And he was again he was very good, but he said that there are hundreds of thousands of those people around. This is something we don't realize, just how organized the infiltrating and the brainwashing is, and how they've aggressively gone out and captured these institutions using really communist Marxist Cold War type infiltration methods and or variations of them, so that they can achieve this level. But they're very single-minded, they're very committed, very focused, laser-like focus, and they go after it, and they've done well. Now, one of the reasons or main reasons why they've done well is and the way they've been able to set up all these networks. Just on the networks, I think I mentioned that whenever we put out adverts for people to say, do marketing and employees, things like trade shows, that sort of stuff. They're nearly all girls that apply, and none of them have worked in your classic job at either McDonald's or the takeout food chain or working at grocery chains. Instead, they've all of them. I mean, not just one or two, but all of them have worked as activists with NGOs. They've been trained in placard waving. They've been trained in hatred of Western society. They've been trained and brainwashed in believing Nazis are everywhere and that sort of stuff. That all of them have had that. We're not talking one or two, but every fucking one of them. I mean, that's insane. But it's an indication of just how wide the reach of these globalist activists are, and how they've trained now this massive cadre of followers that are all Western hating, all straight white male hating, and they're making sure that they get jobs in HR departments and diversity departments and in government departments and quangos and so on. So they've got a total stranglehold and all that sort of stuff, and giving themselves, very well-paying jobs. Now, so how do you reverse all that? I mean, that's the control they've got. When they've achieved that control, then they'll set about, which they've done and are doing, perpetuating the machine. So the universities will continue now to focus heavily on hating white people and white civilization. Everything white people did was bad, and white people, white society has to be eradicated. It was never legitimate anyway, and so on and so forth. But in order to sell that message or push that message of all white people and white society and white structure is illegitimate, they have to engage in some massive telling endless amounts of massive lies in order to do it. Now, which is why they have to shut down all alternative voices. So you like, and you can tell lies to your heart's content as long as you manage to kill off everyone that calls you out on it, which is of course what the globalist activists are doing, and using those flunkies. And whether they use placard wavers, NGO placard wavers about climate change, or whether they use Antifa goon squads or Black Lives Matter goon squads, it doesn't really matter what they use, but those are the devices used to shut down any alternative views, opinions, or questions. Now, coming to the idea of how do you reverse this? Well, reversing isn't that hard. You just need the will to do it and the people in place to do it. Now, there are those who are saying, well, we have to have a counter-revolution and we have to have our own goon squad. So they've got Antifa, we're going to have anti-Antifa. They're going to have BLM, we're going to have anti-BLM. They're going to have placard waving climate change, we're going to have the anti. So this type. So now I do understand that sentiment. Same with they're going to try. They're harassing Republican candidates, so we're going to harass their candidates. They're going to have a university full of black lesbians, we're going to have a university with no black lesbians. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the way to go. And when you wildly swing the pendulums like that, I never think it's a good idea. But having said that, how do you reverse it? It's all very well to say it needs to be reversed and look at the damage it's caused. But how do you reverse it? And that's a much tougher gig. My approach would be that anything you put in place to say, well, let's surgically remove the bad things and only the good things will remain. That's an infantile way of approaching things. It never works that way, because the good and bad always remain relative, so rather than absolute. But there are things that can be done, such as scrupulously free and fair elections. That's an absolute must. And you'd find that a lot of the people who win elections, whether it be for district attorneys or presidents or anything else, that in scrupulously administered free and fair elections, they wouldn't win. So that's one thing. The other things are absolute recognition of merit. So the proportion of bright people among clever people amongst the leftist globalist activists, they've got bright people there, by the way. They're not all morons, but the bright people, and the proportion of dumb people amongst them is greater. So people who have earned their credentials and worked hard to pass the exam, they're less likely, not impervious, by the way, but less likely to succumb to these sort of things. Less likely to come to activism and crazy ideas and notions, and so they're far more likely to be independent of thought. Now, someone comes to you and says, look, we don't like us other people, so why don't we just rig the election? Or we don't like us people, so why don't we just fabricate evidence against them? An activist, a low IQ activist, will succumb to that call. But someone who's earned their position and has worked hard to get that position in a merit-based system, they're much less likely to respond to that. Not that they won't, but they're much less likely to. So the proportion of people that can be so easily corrupted, for example, in a situation of absolute merit and an absolute regard for the law and public service, somebody like Fannie Willis in Georgia would never get anywhere near the position she's got. And so we need to understand the implication of a merit-based system, which is why, by the way, the globalist activist groups are so terrified of merit. because it would militate against them and against their activism and against their brainwashing. So there are things that we can do there with merit. For example, the kids going to university. If you strictly had a merit system of university, then more than 2/3 of the kids at university today wouldn't be there. They'd have to go out to work, and they'd be much less susceptible to being radicalized. And because they wouldn't be in university, they wouldn't be in a position where they could be mass group radicalized. They'd be out dispersed widely across the workforce. Somebody would work in Starbucks, someone at, I don't know, takeout food shop, and so on and so forth. So they're much harder to radicalize them when they're dispersed like that. But when they're concentrated, they're low IQ, they don't have any meritorious reason for being at the college, then they're much easier to radicalize, and also to promote the politics of envy and things of that nature. Look at all those Nazis out there. So these are things that can be done. Now, they're not major sort of dramatic big things. And for anyone who's looking at the big sort of thing, the push button that's going to fit, that's not how it's going to work. So just by scrupulously administered elections, by a public service ethics sort of test on public officials. Again, you apply a public service ethics test to things like Alvin Bragg and Fannie Willis, then they wouldn't have their jobs, in my opinion. And then merit-based access to universities and higher education and so on. But the idea, the culture of public service, which seems to have disappeared, that could be reintroduced as a standard. If you're going to hold political office or a DA or anything or even a teacher at a university or high school, you are a public servant. You are giving the public a service. You're not trying to re-engineer society, but you're giving the public a service, and that has to be scrupulously observed. When I was at high school, there were teachers that were held political views. Some you'd even say would be radical views, but they didn't bring it out in the classroom. That's quite different today, and that standard of permissiveness of activism is something that somebody dedicated to public service simply wouldn't do. So by just the merit standard for university alone, that would chop off a vast number of people from the activist thing. Now, once they're out of the university system, then they're not part of the NGO system, and again, many of these people, particularly the activists around, most of the activists around, or the activist mobs, most of them wouldn't even make it out of junior high school. And once they're out of the education system, they're out of the radicalization system. So this would also have a big effect. They'd be out working and so on. Now, the whole other things I could go on about, such as cost of living and making living more affordable. The government policies there, which would give people a stake in the future and a stake in society. Those things definitely can be looked at. But just cutting off the majority without senior high school and college, nearly all the radicalization flunkies and zombies that the globalists can get their hands on would be moved out of their control and out of their range. So that's just one thing alone. Coming to the recruitment of, if you look at the radical or the most radical college lecturers, not that they'd be needed if there was a big reduction in number of students, but if you look at them, they're also affirmative action hiring. So we need to look at affirmative action, because affirmative action typically is the cover that's used to install activists into human resource departments to create diversity, equity, and inclusion departments, and so on. That activism. So by removing affirmative action, we also remove this massive cadre of activists that have crept their way into business and into the bigger companies, international firms, and so on. So these are some of the things that can be done. And none of them in themselves are big or radical, so on, but they would have a profound effect on the landscape when it comes to infiltration and control of our institutions. You've been Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.